Hello everybody for tonight's webinar on lifting the data fog, presented to you by Human IT, the software vendor of InfoZoom. So our topic today is lifting the data fog, how to successfully start DQM projects. And I'm very glad to be here with you. May I introduce you myself? I'm Matthias Knapp. I studied mechanical engineering and economics, and my business career led me through positions in logistics and production management, and I ended up with data, as some of you might have experienced themselves. Data engineers, data scientists, there's nothing to be learned in college. It's something you do in practical business. And if I would introduce myself by just a few topics that I cover, I would say I'm a crime scene cleaner. I wipe off the blood from the walls of the ERP systems. I'm perhaps an interior designer, setting up settings that will suit the needs of the people living in a house and make them feel happy and wishing to live there. I consider myself and my team to be a moving company for data, bringing data from A to B and ensuring that everything is tidy and not broken when unwrapped and stored and placed in the new house. And yes, somehow I and my team, we are cultural creators. We try to establish a culture of data and awareness for the importance of data. But that's enough on myself. What you can expect today, it's three major chapters. It's a why, what, and how of data analytics. It's an experience of a live presentation on data using InfoZoom, and then I apply some things in practical topic of data migration, which has been announced also in this webinar. Invitation, and give a brief outlook. So why data is so important? If you look at data, it's like searching for the needle in the haystack. You're happy after finding it. It takes you some time, and the haystack today is the ERP systems, the CRM systems, the PLM system, you name it. And still processes are heavily depending on information. The search for information is quite time-consuming and error-prone. But information is a prerequisite for all of our decisions, for all of our processes, on processing of orders, on planning and reporting, forecasting and controlling, and more for compliance issues. Import to certain countries needs heavy loads of paper and information, sometimes sent in advance, and you need a place to store and to find it. And that's what makes the haystack interesting. There are different perspectives on it. From a business perspective, you would ask yourself, do I have this needle already? Or where is a particular needle? If you are in reporting, your question might be, what is the turnover of needles, or of those with a yellow head, for instance? And the third party in this game are the so-called data scientists, the nerds that care about the data, about the topics and items in the haystack, who ask themselves, which objects are there? Which attributes do I need to describe it? So one party is searching, the second is evaluating, and the third tries to give structure to the haystack and to its content. And giving structure is something I really stress. I say only a well-defined field is a good field. Only a field where you know what to find in and where you could really be safe in searching content is a good field and can be used for both automated data processing and manual data processing. So that's why it is important. But what needs to be done? There are people saying, okay, data quality is poor, you should take care of it. But who has defined the rules? Are there rules? And who is responsible for data quality? So there are different perspectives on data quality. It's the assessment of data, it's rules and metrics to be applied. On the other hand, there are some policies from business processes and their requirements that need certain data. And there's a third perspective. It's goals given by the C-levels, the requirements from a strategical perspective, and the requirements from reporting issues that you have. And those all are connected. And it might be important if you migrate data. It might be important if you try to better comply to regulations, or from more business-oriented perspective, you just try to unify your terminology, or also from a business side, but mostly driven by C-levels and controlling trying to reduce stock levels, which are induced by duplicates in the material and the item master. Or you just set up a web shop and need some information in a proper manner that you can import into the web shop, and which could be retrieved and searched by the users that visit the web shop. So there are different perspectives on data quality which need to be addressed. So assessing data quality could, in a narrow sense, mean that you do a technical assessment. Some statistics on rows and columns or tables where you try to find if a certain value is correct or is allowed or consistent, and also search for duplicates. It could be a functional perspective, a functional assessment regarding processes, and that's where the fit for use principle comes into the game. You want to have data that fits your needs, that assists and helps the process that you are running. In a broader sense, data quality assessment could also mean that you have organizational aspects in mind. You try to economically assess based on the efficiency of processes, the costs that arise from bad processes, from mistakes you have made, from shipments that have been delivered to the wrong customer or to the wrong place. And last but not least, in the broader sense, data quality assessment could also be a benchmarking for organizational topics. Like here, a benchmarking that we have executed. Is there a non-operational business unit monitoring data quality, and where is it located? It's just one question of a survey that we conducted. And in the end, it might end up in different kinds of visualization. It could be, on the one hand, error lists, correction lists, update lists showing data sets. It could be graphics and charts that give you a frequency, a distribution. In that case, it's taken from a project, and it shows if the tariff number, the commodity code, is valid or not, or is presented or not. And you can aggregate those figures to a dashboard and have key performance indicators that pop up every morning and inform you about the overall data quality in your company, with the possibility to drill down into certain KPIs to find out correlations and so on. It depends, but it's always different types of results that you need to present. You need to have lists that give the user the possibility to enhance data, to correct data. You need graphics to communicate, and some kind of aggregation to be able to report the overall quality. And this is something you have to take into account when setting up data quality metrics and a tool and you should take care that the tool can contribute to all of the three dimensions. So the next step is how to gain an overview. What I learned from almost 15 to 20 years experience is that evaluation of processes is not always the best way. The basic idea is that processes always generate data and always use data. So perhaps data quality analysis are superior to process analysis and at least should complement them. So you can objectively measure data. There is data or not. There is a completeness or not. Data you are seeing is valid or not. This is quite objective, whereas process landscapes always tend to have a 50, 60, 70% validity because there are always processes which run different from the given sequence or content. So my favorite is focusing on data. And if we analyze data, the analysis is carried out under different aspects. It's a design quality. So is the data model appropriate to represent the required information? Is the content that we do find inside databases in conformance to the design? So does it comply with the design? Are the formats in proper shape? Are fields misused? And last but not least, it's the data quality in the narrow sense. Is the data that we find valid? Is it up to date or not? And leading to how we use InfoZoom, we apply InfoZoom on almost any initial analysis that we perform at a customer's place, independent from the data domain. It could be item master, it could be customer vendor master, it could be document master, plants, equipment, whatever. And it helps us to create a data catalog and easily analyze the metadata. So seeing which fields are there, how are they populated, and so on. And we use it also initially to watch the data from a business perspective. Second step could be the cleansing and enrichment. So either a static one and one-time cleansing or dynamic one, because InfoZoom helps us to establish or develop rules, establish and develop mappings for migration projects, for instance, and there we use InfoZoom to manipulate, to transfer data. This leads us to the third step. We use it for migration purposes in field and also value mapping. We convert values, we split and merge and do any kind of transformation with functions and algorithms, and also apply InfoZoom for conformity checks. So field length, for instance, or rule-based conformity checks that we apply. And in the very end, after having set up a lot of rules, those rules could easily be used in long term for monitoring purposes. So we could use them for a permanent check, a periodical check, and we could create reports and dashboards within InfoZoom or using InfoZoom and delivering it to other visualization tools. What we do in our assessment, in our so-called data value roadmap, results in different levels of reporting. So we give you a status quo and a roadmap for a report on management level. We deliver business rules to allow departments to better control their data on the entry level or in using it or ex post. And also we are able to deliver error or update lists on user level to be cleansed. And it could look like that. Some slides from presentations of such assessments. We investigate the data volume, the increase in data over time. We see the second picture at a glance, the metadata and the field usage, and see where data is missing. You will see how it comes from in InfoZoom. We see distributions and frequencies of formats and patterns and contents, like in the right chart. We could explain the validity, the consistency, and so on, some metrics on data, or in the middle, we see duplicate analysis results by names, by item properties, or if it's a business partner domain, by address, by value-added tax ID, by phone number, and other means, where we just figure out the duplicate ratio that is seen in the data. And the third one on the right-hand side, it's data integrity. So if we compare different databases, like the ERP system as a CRM system with concern to customers, we see the overlap between the systems and could also do integrity checks and perhaps even match records that don't have a common identifier. We then create error lists, like on the left-hand side. We collect our results and give it a prioritization according to a cost and benefit estimation. And in the long run, we set up a roadmap program of tasks to be executed in a certain sequence to improve data quality and then keep it high on a sustainable and long-lasting high level. Yes, how do we use InfoZoom then? The experience that I promised to you. And I would just briefly tell you what my expectation is on what is data quality, a short introduction to the tool that I'm going to show, InfoZoom, its basic principles and how we use it. And then we go in depth into that tool and just try how it feels and how it looks like, and execute some metadata analysis and some samples of how to detect anomalies in value lists or with roots. And perhaps I show you some possibilities for cleansing. So what is data quality to me? Data quality to me is the ability of data to provide the required information to the process. So processes need data, that's what I've said, and data quality is the enabler for good processes. And if a process relies on bad data, it can't be a good process. It's perhaps only by chance returning good results. Three perspectives are important on data quality. It's a technical perspective on the one hand side. I think it's the least important. It's the IT landscape, it's applications, database, interfaces in a given corporate structure with different languages, different sites, and so on. More important, it's an organizational perspective, processes and roles for defining and monitoring data, which is a normative role, which is regulatory, and the processes and roles for the data lifecycle. So creation, the change, the archiving of data. Again, this takes into account how the company is structured, if there are different languages, if there's collaboration between sites. This is an organizational perspective and the need, the urgent need to define processes and roles. And for me, most important is the business perspective. It's the content and the formal requirements for information. So the patterns information should have to be retrieved, to be interpreted and used. And therefore, it's important how this information is provided, how it can be accessed, how it's presented, and how the usage is done. Because these are things that we see in practice. Data field holding the information, 2 black, 1 white. Nobody in that company knew how to interpret this information, 2 black, 1 white, until we went down shop floor into the warehouse, picked that part and found that the gearbox has different components, 2 of them black, 1 white. And we had a similar one with 1 white, 2 black. The original content of this information would have been, it's a different noise, it's a different energy absorbed by this gearbox, but in the data, we just found 2 black, 1 white. Nobody could interpret this information. As such, it was not interpretable. It needs and requires prior knowledge and expertise in that particular field. And even the construction engineer did not know what was meant by this declaration. And also a very a favorite data quality metrics that I'm using is, it is hard to learn. How should somebody learn what is meant by 2 black, 1 white without proper explanations? And this is a good quality metrics because if it takes long to train new employees, then perhaps your data quality is poor. Let's switch then to InfoZoom. What I did is I Googled some product catalog, and I will run InfoZoom using on data that I've never seen before myself. So open InfoZoom, blank screen, some ribbons above, and what I've done to be sure that I get the data, I just take this Excel file that I have just Googled and drop it into InfoZoom. That's it. At the first glance, I see there are different tabs. I look for an English one, so I decide to take this English one. Perhaps we could briefly open it that you see how it is structured. Yes, it's protected, so we have the different tabs. And as usual, the lines are sets of data, and obviously the columns indicate that there are some attributes, some properties of these parts inside that Excel sheet. Okay, back to InfoZoom. It detects that these records are in rows. You could switch into columns, but it doesn't make sense in this case. Back to the rows. It would indicate the column heads to be attributes, or expecting that these are attributes. And I just click next, decide to import everything from that table, every single column, and just press finish. And the first thing that I learned from this is that this table contains special characters. There are more than 1,500 control characters inside it, which is interesting because if you take it and drop it into another Excel sheet, it will certainly cause some mistakes and errors of lines, line breaks that did not work, of tabs that shift columns, and it could go wrong badly if I don't see that there are control characters in there. So this is one of the advantages, very easy and fundamental things that InfoZoom just brings with it. Second is that it guesses what the different data types within the fields are, and it does so using a distribution of pattern frequency, and is far better than an Access database or other things that guess the data type. I just import it, and by these marks, you see that there are some values inside that are not following the expected format. Like in the width, it's expected to be a number, and if I go on this list, you see that there are values inside. Just make it a bit bigger, which are TBA or just a dash. And very easily you have seen or experienced and learned without knowing the data beforehand that there are not always numbers in those fields, which should obviously contain numbers by somehow, as it's frequently done in Excel. This field has been misused, entering text. You might have noticed that the display of InfoZoom is different from the one you have seen in Excel. The reason for this is that the column heads of the Excel are now the row heads of what we see in InfoZoom. So you have to tilt your head, and you're in Excel mode. At the moment, it's the objects, it's the different articles, the items that are to be read from top to bottom. You have the article number here, the availability, its description 1 and 2, the model, ceiling, surface, and so on. So these are all the characteristics, the attributes, the columns of the Excel sheet, which are now tilted, and you have the article from top to bottom. Why does InfoZoom do so? That's an easy reason behind. There is a so-called overview, and all data will be brought to one screen. Everything, all the almost 1,000 articles are compressed onto one screen, and the size of each segment here indicates how frequent a certain value is. So you have the different values inside all on one screen. You could, let's step back to the width. You could go and search and look into the value distribution, which could be ordered by numbers or by the frequency. But you see the same at one glance on this InfoScape, the central part of InfoZoom. So you see that the most frequent value is the dash. You see that 0.49 is far more frequent than any other thing in between. And 0.14, 0.12 are more frequent even. And so you see at first glance on import if there are control characters. You have an educated guess on how these attributes are typed, and you could easily see by this mark that there are some values that violate the expected format. There are other attributes where this does not happen, and you could easily see that at a glance. And coming back to the metadata that I promised to evaluate, this is a very easy functionality to just go to the check ribbon and just check the metadata. What does it do? It just converts and shows all the attributes in the table in a metadata format, and you see now the data on the data. You see that there are a certain range of attributes, 43 different attributes used, and on those you see the number of distinct values and so on. You could then switch back, for instance, to the table mode and see that the article name is meant to be a string. It's 862 different values in it, and that's good because 862 objects are listed, and it's good to have a unique identifier. You see it's to 100% filled, and there's no empty value in here, and so on. On others, where you don't know what the type is, you also see what the percentage of objects is which do have illegal values, which don't fit the format. And you could easily, just by picking the attribute name, number of distinct values, the objects with empty value, the maximum length of the field, just pick a few of them and export the result to Excel. Okay, that's a line break even in the article, in the attribute name I've seen. But what we have now done is create a basic metadata catalog. You have all the attributes here. You have the number of different values that can be found. You have an indication which are empty, and you see how long the value is, which is most important for migration issues. Because if you see here that the description 1 and 2 are longer than 50 characters, most ERP systems wouldn't be appropriate to take hold of these long descriptions. For instance, SAP is limited to 40 characters, so you know at a glance that there are some objects which descriptions don't fit into SAP, cannot be migrated as such. So easy possibility to create a metadata catalog. Second thing here could be go into value distributions and just search for anomalies. You see that there is a power rating in here. We could switch back to the, no, it's okay. There's a power rating here, and you see that there is a bunch of things where it is a minus in here. And you see also that this, if I click somewhere here, highlights and marks the area in this ribbon, and you get a brief impression of how the portion of the total is. And this leads us to the question why it is called InfoZoom. It's called InfoZoom because if you want to see all articles having 82 watts as a power, you just double click and you drill down into the subset of all items, which are 48 of the 862, and allows you to drill down to the attributes that fit this this property, and you have the list of articles here. You could just fix it here. You could also put the description here and see, okay, those typically have a same name, so several have the same name, and you could then see, okay, these are the 48 articles having 82 watts, and I want to drill down then to a certain light, and I can narrow down with everything that I want to have until I perhaps am down to a list of 2 different possibilities. So this is yet a combination. You see the red marking where I have drilled down, white coded 82 watts, 12,710 lumen, and this particular description. And if I then decide to go a step back, I could just do, okay, I want to skip this and I keep the other limitations, and I can focus down and zoom in and zoom out into different areas of my data, which is very, very helpful if you want to see correlations and to see anomalies in your data. What you can do then is, for instance, this is clicked it by chance, but you can see that investigation on the value list is sometimes very giving you a lot of insights. So an attribute named size has this different values inside. So again, you have some numbers, you have some strings, you have different concepts which are easily recognized. You have the number of elements, you have a length here. Perhaps these are also lengths, but without a measure, unit of measure. And you have some sizes which are just like clothing sizes, LMS. And if you drill down here, I'm interested myself, you see, yeah, it's just a different type of or concept of size specification. It's not clothing. Sometimes I would have expected then to find some jackets or trousers in here. So you see that investigation of data is very easy, just intuitively, but you could also set up rules. So if you want to combine these elements things, you can do some kind of mapping. So you could just say, okay, I want to change it, and it changes here because different elements are highlighted. You see it always correlates with what you click on. If you say one or one element are the same, I want to have it, and write it in capital letters to make it visible. I would just change it, and I change the data automatically. So, yeah, proper writing could do so, and in the end, just go for the changed objects and say, okay, this was the steps that I've done. These are the objects that I've changed. Please give me a list of those. and as we have learned, just export it to Excel, and this is an update list that we created. And you see some error because Excel always makes errors. By standard formatting, it's decided that this is a number. This is obviously wrong. We have found out that this is actually a string, so I change it, and bam, Excel has changed likewise. So we have the update list, and you could take this list to import into your legacy system and to cleanse and correct your data. But sometimes you don't want to work on the current data. You want to have things for the future, and you want to create a mapping. So I have stepped back. I want then to create a mapping list, which allows me to also cleanse data that I currently not know of, articles that will appear in the future. So what I do then is, first I move it back to string. I just create a duplicate of this, and it gets locked one to the other, and you see that it's both the same. And what I do then is I go into this copy, which I might rename into update of size, and I do what I have done before in here. So I create the one element, I create the two elements, whatever, and then export these two. Some would expect that I return 862 lines. In fact, I get a projection of just these two attributes, and what I get is a brief lookup list. And I see this is the input value, which would return, if I join it, would return a unified update, and this could be used on a left join, for instance, to update fields that I do not even know in the future, data sets that don't exist currently. So I could easily create some mapping tables on this. And these are just some functions to orientate yourself to create better data in here. InfoZoom is not limited to that. InfoZoom is capable of a huge bunch of attributes and formulas that you can create on your own. So, for instance, there are different types of items in this list. There's an attribute called type, and perhaps you want to know how many different power ratings are there per type. And you just create a new attribute, and it proposes automatically that you want to count, just by the order of clicking, you want to see the count of power per type. In this case, I would rather prefer a list of power per type. So I create a list attribute. Yes, I can't do so because this is not typed, but if I can create it, and I see in ceiling, you have a list of those powers. And if we go for, let's drill down into a particular one, for suspension adjustable ones, they are only available in 9 or 18 watts. You see that combining attributes using formula is easily possible, and allows you to manage data and to create new insights also there. You could also store this information. In the background, InfoZoom collects the information on what you're doing, not only on drilling down, so zooming in or out, but also creation of attributes could be recorded. And you could store this like an Excel macro. And after setting back everything, you could just execute the same thing, the same pop-ups will show up, and even the same Excel would be created in the background. And these queries could be used to automate processes on data evaluation and cleansing, and also to create reports overnight, because all these these macros, these queries could be triggered by command line batch routines and could be done without manual effort. Just to give you a brief impression on how powerful this is, I would show you some, let's take this one, some investigations on this here. This is the EIN, or currently we will call it a GTIN, a global trade item number, which identifies uniquely any product. So first of all, I would expect that there are no two products having the same EIN, but nevertheless, I would show you something more. I would take from our library of routines a GTIN format checker. So this is something we have created as business consultants, not a software vendor. And we would easily say, okay, I'm looking for a GTIN, and it's a field called EIN package 1 in this particular database that I want to test. I would say, okay, this is what I mean. And it creates some additional attributes which have been predefined and which now are checked and run. And from that, I see, okay, every check ticket is valid. So these GTIN numbers are in shape, no problem with those. I can do this using formula. I can also do so in joining other information. So I could, for the Interstat number, I could just open a database that I created separately, just put it beside this. And now I'm looking for the Interstat number, so I have to change this name and saying, okay, join the other into the first. And what we see from here is, after preparing the validity of Interstat numbers, we see that in one case, the input is not valid. So there is an Interstat number given, and from separate data, there's not some check ticket or something, but external data, we couldn't derive that this Interstat number is outdated, it's not valid at the current time being, and it has been replaced on the 1st of January 2006 by a different number. And the one and only replacement that is currently valid would be this one. Yeah, it has been split up. This one would be the relevant one and the correct predecessor of the one given in the data, which is currently wrong. So we have a validity check against reference data, giving you better data and returns the correct result. Okay, this was enough on a brief description on InfoZoom. We have seen metadata evaluation. We have seen that we detect control characters and some science inside. We have seen how to export data either on the broad range, giving article numbers and description on the. Oops, I have zoomed in. Yes, okay, let me reset. Article numbers and descriptions. You can see the full range of articles, but you could also drill down and see how this changes, how this Excel always gives you the appropriate selection that you have done in investigating particular values. We have seen on the size attribute how you could evaluate the distribution of values independent from how frequent they are used. Or if you want, you could do it on the majority first and just drill down into that. And you have also seen how you could create data cleansing mappings or do the cleansing directly within the data. So everything that we have seen before has been shown in InfoZoom. The only thing that we did not show until now is how to present a chart from it. I just drag one. Yeah, it's not a nice one. You could change its shape, but obviously it's possible, and so all the requirements that we have set up are met. You could get the most out of your data from that InfoZoom application. Let me then switch back to the presentation, how this could be applied, and it was announced to be a focus on data migration. So from a user perspective, the most important thing for migration is that the right information should be migrated. And right means, on the one hand, the selection of the right objects, and secondly, right in the sense of correct data. So this is what InfoZoom supports, to find the correct set of data within a database and to ensure that it is correct, either because it is correct or because it can be corrected. Because secondly, the migration is always intended to improve the quality of data. Typically, you pour things from one bucket into the other and the quality gets worse, but usually you expect to have better data later. And so the existing structural and the content errors shall always be corrected prior or during migration. The vendor that sells the software typically does not support this. He says, I give the target, I give you the templates, and I get my application ready to run with little effort as possible on data quality, because his goal is a running application. The different strategy from user perspective would be a push approach, saying, okay, what is in the sources? No matter what the target is, but first really learn to know what is the relevant information, what is data within my sources that is relevant for migration. The metadata to be analyzed, not to cut off some descriptions which are too long. And the data defects have to be cleaned up before or during migration to avoid losses of information and to have more effort to have better data quality taken into account. That obviously there's more effort on this, but in the long end, the goal is a running business, not only a running application. And the challenges in this approach are the three letters of ETL. The first is to extract the data from the legacy systems, which should be provided from the source systems automatically. We often experience and encounter situations where our customers are not able to get the data out of the legacy systems. And timely in this context means this should be done and possible within hours, not days or weeks. Secondly, the data has to be provided in the appropriate and required import format. So this is the L, the load of ETL. And that means that everything that needs to be transported in migration has to be reliably provided in a way that allows to automatically load it. Besides some few manually created records, almost every large portion of data should be automatically processed. And that makes the gap in between so hard, because everything needs to be processed, and it should be done in a way that it could be repeatedly done without any loss in quality and content. And this needs to be done. This are numbers from implementation we ran just a couple of months ago. It has to be done for all data domains and all objects, so it could easily be 120 tables that you need to create. Because in the end, no data means no processes, and incorrect data is even worse. It will run the processes, but will deliver incorrect results. So the qualified data migration is key, is determining the success of the whole rollout. You should take it into account as early as possible. And this is takeaway from 15 years of migration. The first thing is to explain who does what, the interaction between business units, your IT, and the software vendor who runs and implements the target software is key and first thing that you should ensure, to be sure what are the departments to be involved, what is the data model, does it fit. Second, it's a timely start, scouting of data, analysis to be executed, and identifying the relevant data to have a common understanding and not discussing to the very end to cut over which data should be migrated and which does not need to be migrated. And secondly, an early assessment of data quality gives you an overview of the tasks and the timeline to be planned, because a lot of tasks, especially those of manual data cleansing, need time. And if scheduled late in the project, you run short of time, and it will really endanger the success of your rollout. Third is the transformation itself. And it is always a transformation, not only of the content of the data in the fields, it's always a transformation also of the schema. So like we have seen before, there might be mappings between values that have to be consolidated, to be harmonized. And some of the corrections can be done in the source system. Some of them must be done during the migration, and therefore you have to set up mappings and conversion routines that are to be run in real time during migration and without any manual interaction. And in the end, that's a perspective on it. You have to watch out for sustainability to ensure that the implementation is running, and to ensure that by training of rules and technical and the business functional perspective, and that these new insights are really used in the future. So what is the final perspective? What is the outlook then? First is start to detect errors. If you see a data error, this is a good starting point. This doesn't change the data at all. The error rate remains high, and there's no measurable benefit just from being aware of data errors. But you could then start implementing and correcting errors. So it would decrease your defects, but since you did not change the system, the same errors will appear again and again. And the corrections will repeatedly absorb resources. And yeah, it will help you, but it's as much benefit as it is effort. Therefore, it needs some conceptual approaches and steps to be taken. And this means that you eliminate the causes, the root causes for the errors. You need to implement new concepts. It could be new kinds of article numbers, new terminology, product groups that you implement, which help to improve data maintenance. And this is a prerequisite for good data of the future. If you only do those conceptual things, old data wouldn't change and would always hinder you from being efficient. But if you combine the two, correct the errors and eliminate the root causes, then you truly come to the quadrant to manage data quality. And since you monitor the data quality, the number and the rate of errors decrease permanently. And you can keep data quality high or the errors at low level. And the benefit that arises from this is really powerful. And then the DQM, the data quality management activities, are really proactive, and you really get into control of what is your task. And now I want to end with a slide that I created during a workshop session. This starting was a German tick box, a German labeled tick box kritischer style, which means this is a critical part. And I asked my customer on this migration project, do we need to migrate the information critical part or not? And this is the most easy way of data. It's a 0 or a 1, a tick box or not. And I asked him, what does this hook mean? And he said, yesterday, it was nice to know if this particular part is critical, but actually it doesn't control anything. It's badly maintained. We tried to set up something, but it did not work, and we didn't get accustomed to really use it. And I asked, okay, what does it really mean? And they said, okay, there's a technical definition. It's a part that is getting worn, and the wear expectation is known, so it will someday break. And those are the parts that have a long replenishment time. So our customer has to wait long time if this part breaks and we don't have it in stock. That was then my part to say, okay, but you have data on this. You have the historical delivery time of your vendor. You know that he's on holiday in August every year. So why not create added value from it? So tomorrow you could be predictive. You could adopt your stocking strategy to this critical part indication, which is someday automatically defined. You could increase your service. You could change and adopt your information policy and inform your customer on the availability of critical parts. So this is an added value, and in the end, it's a business case which changes your service and your way to work in overseas markets, for instance. And while this discussion started with IT guys and some business guys discussing on a checkbox on the graphical user interface, this discussion ended with C-levels discussing service strategy of tomorrow. And this is what impresses me again and again, that discussions on the very tiny bits of data, if done with insights, are creating value and are very beneficial for a company's strategy, and are not only data and zeros and ones in a database. Just visit us on kdq.de or visit InfoZoom.com, the software supplier and vendor that I just introduced and which I'm very fond of. And if you want to have a virtual cup of coffee, you're more than invited to join our coffee lounge. Thank you very much.